Have you ever been told you don't belong even when you earned every right to be there? Imagine walking up to your seat, a ticket in your hand, only to be told it's not yours. Not because of a mistake, not because of a policy, but because someone decided you didn't fit the part. That's exactly what happened to Dr. Lorraine Bennett, a black CEO on her way to a life-changing deal. In front of dozens of strangers, her boarding pass was torn in half, her dignity ripped away in seconds. Now ask yourself, if it were you, standing there, would you step aside quietly, or would you stand firm even when the world is watching, even when the system seems bigger than you? This is not just a story about one woman. It's about choice. It's about dignity. And it's about what happens when quiet strength collides with arrogance and injustice. What Dr. Bennett did next shocked everyone. Within 30 minutes, she turned humiliation into power and forced an entire airline to its knees. Stay with us. Like, share, and subscribe to join us as we step into her story. The morning air at Logan International carried that mix of jet fuel and coffee beans that always seemed to cling to airport concourses. Dr. Lorraine Bennett walked steadily across the polished floor, a plain leather tote resting on her shoulder, her passport and boarding pass gripped loosely in her hand. She wasn't the type who needed to rush. Years of building her company from a cramped apartment in Newark had taught her one thing: move with purpose, not panic. At 42, Lorraine had grown comfortable in her own quiet rhythm. She preferred her SUV with 120,000 miles on it to the sleek town cars her colleagues loved. She drank black coffee, never caramel lattes. And though she signed contracts worth hundreds of millions, her wardrobe was simple charcoal blazer, white blouse, and the same comfortable flats she had worn for years. The destination this morning was New York. A crucial signing ceremony awaited her, a partnership that could expand Aerolink Systems, her technology firm, into international aviation. She had booked first class not for luxury, but because she needed the quiet. On that short flight, she planned to refine her remarks one last time. She reached the gate with minutes to spare. The boarding area hummed with chatter, punctuated by the occasional ding of the PA system. Lorraine stepped forward when the announcement called first class. She handed her boarding pass to the lead flight attendant. Jessica's counterpart that morning was Nora Whitfield, tall, blonde, hair pulled back in a bun so tight it looked like it hurt. She scanned Lorraine's face, then the tote, then back again. Her lips thinned into something that wasn't quite a smile. "This is first class, ma'am," Nora said. Her voice dipped in the kind of courtesy that's paid by the hour, not the heart. Lorraine kept her expression calm. "I'm aware. Seat 2A. She held out her boarding pass, a little crease on the corner where her thumb had pressed too tightly. Nora glanced at it, eyes flicking quickly. Then without hesitation, she tore it straight down the middle. The sound of ripping paper sliced through the hum of the gate. Conversations faltered. Heads turned. "Must be a mistake," Nora said flatly, tossing the halves into the trash. From behind, heels clicked like a gavel. A tall man in a cream-colored suit stepped forward, clutching a monogrammed briefcase. Trevor Langford. His tan was too even, his smile too polished. He moved with the confidence of someone who had never been told no in his life. "That window seat is mine," Trevor announced, his tone dripping with entitlement. "I always book 2A. The arrogance in his voice made Lorraine's stomach tighten, but she didn't flinch. "Sir, this is my boarding pass, purchased weeks ago." Nora nodded toward Trevor as if he were royalty. "Miss, I'll have to ask you to step aside. You're upsetting our VIP guests." Lorraine stayed where she was, her back straight, her hands still at her sides. Around her, whispers bloomed like weeds. A young couple nudged each other. A woman discreetly lifted her phone and angled it. Recording. It wasn't the first time Lorraine had felt eyes on her this way. She remembered 9th grade, when her teacher, Mrs. Rollins, looked her dead in the eye and said, "Girls like you don't end up in college. Honey, just find a job and stay out of trouble." That voice still lingered sometimes, like a shadow she had never completely shaken off. But shadows had taught her resilience. Every slight, every insult had become a piece of armor. Trevor leaned closer with a syrupy smirk. Who let her in here? This isn't a charity flight. Nora chuckled softly. Complicit. We'll sort it out. Just a misunderstanding. No, Trevor said, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. It's a security risk. Someone snickered. Another shook his head and looked away. Lorraine met Nora's eyes. Her voice was even. I paid for this seat. I have every right to board. Nora's tone sharpened. You're causing a scene. If you don't comply, I'll call security. Lorraine felt her jaw tighten, but her body remained steady. She glanced around at the rows of watching faces, some amused, some visibly uncomfortable, others frozen in complicity. From the corner of the lounge, a young woman in jeans and sneakers lifted her phone just a little higher. Maya Collins, 23, an amateur travel vlogger who'd been filming her journey for fun, now captured something she hadn't expected. Lorraine inhaled slowly, centering herself. Her instinct told her to swallow it, to step aside, to preserve her dignity in silence. But another part of her, the part forged by long nights coding under a flickering desk lamp in Newark, whispered, Not this time. Nora's hand pressed against her shoulder, the gesture firm, almost shoving. Ma'am, you need to move. Lorraine's voice stayed calm, almost too calm. This will be a moment you remember. Nora scoffed. What? You'll write a bad review, Lorraine said, her eyes steady. I'll write your future. Trevor rolled his eyes, clearly amused. Is that supposed to scare us? Lorraine didn't answer. She didn't need to. The fire she carried wasn't loud. It never had been. But in that instant, she knew within the next half hour, the humiliation they tried to bury would bury their entire airline. The cabin of the aircraft seemed to shrink around Lorraine as she finally stepped inside. Passengers settled into their plush leather seats, champagne flutes catching the morning light. She should have been sliding into 2A by the window, arranging her notes for the contract signing that awaited her in New York. Instead, she found herself guided pushed toward the very back, to a cramped seat near the lavatories that still smelled faintly of disinfectant. The downgrade wasn't just about space, it was about dignity. Nora Whitfield walked ahead with the stiff poise of someone convinced she was right. Better than a folding chair. Isn't it? She muttered under her breath, just loud enough for Lorraine to hear. Lorraine sat down slowly, her hands resting on her lap. She didn't react, but inside, she felt the old ache rise again. It was an ache she had known since childhood, when she was the only black girl in her advanced math class. Her hand always raised, her answers always doubted. It was the same ache from her early career days when recruiters smiled politely, then told her she wasn't a cultural fit. The hum of the engines grew as passengers continued boarding. Trevor Langford strode down the aisle and dropped into the very seat that was supposed to be hers 2A. He didn't even glance back at her. He slipped off his blazer, signaled for champagne before the plane even left the ground, and leaned back with the smug ease of someone who believed the world owed him a throne. Lorraine pressed her eyes shut for a moment. You could walk away, she thought. Let this one pass like all the others. You have a meeting to attend. Don't jeopardize it. But another voice, quiet yet insistent, pulsed in the back of her mind. How many more times will they erase you before you decide to stop being erased? Her smartwatch buzzed lightly on her wrist, reminding her of the hour. A quiet reminder of the tool she carried, the one no one on this plane realized she controlled. Airline Systems wasn't just a company. It was the invisible backbone of more than 40% of airline data in the country. Reservations, crew schedules, operational messaging. All of it ran on code she and her team had built. She exhaled through her nose, her heartbeat steady. Power wasn't in raising her voice or throwing a fit in front of these strangers. Real power was in knowing she had the ability to turn humiliation into accountability. From across the aisle, the young woman with the phone, Maya Collins, was still recording discreetly. Lorraine caught her eye for the briefest moment. Maya nodded ever so slightly, as though saying, I see you. The gesture mattered more than Lorraine expected. It reminded her she wasn't entirely alone in this cabin filled with whispers and side glances. A flight attendant moved down the aisle with a tray of champagne, offering Trevor a flute with a smile too wide, too eager. He clinked his glass against the empty air and laughed at something on his phone. As the cart rolled past Lorraine, the attendant didn't even pause to ask if she wanted water. The insult was small, but layered on top of everything else. It pressed like a stone against her chest. She looked out the tiny oval window beside her, the tarmac, the wing glinting in sunlight, ground crew moving in orange vests. For a second, she wondered if her father would approve of what she was about to do. He had been a dock worker in Newark, hands cracked from lifting crates, back bent from long hours. He used to tell her, Lorraine, no matter where they seat you, make them see you. That voice, deep and steady, still lived inside her. The aircraft doors closed with a hiss. Nora's heels clicked down the aisle as she prepared the cabin for takeoff. She glanced once at Lorraine, lips curving into a faint smirk, then turned away. Trevor leaned toward Nora and murmured something. They both laughed quietly. Lorraine caught just enough of it. At least standards are still being enforced. Her jaw tightened, but she stayed still. Not yet, she thought. Ethan Ward, a technician in his late 30s wearing a North Sky Airlines badge, slipped into the jump seat near the galley. Lorraine noticed the way his eyes flicked toward her, then quickly away, as if he knew more than he wanted to admit. He carried himself with the weary look of someone who had seen too much behind the curtain. As the engines roared to life, Lorraine placed her tote under the seat. Her fingers brushed against the edge of a slim black folder inside. It contained her speech for the New York signing, carefully prepared over weeks. But at this moment, the words on those pages felt fragile compared to the storm brewing in her chest. The plane lifted off, nose rising into the pale morning sky. Lorraine closed her eyes as the cabin tilted, the sensation pressing her deeper into her seat. Around her, first-class passengers sipped champagne, flipped open glossy magazines, scrolled their phones without a care. Her mind, however, was elsewhere. She thought of her company Airline and the 22 engineers waiting in their Boston office, watching stock tickers and system dashboards, trusting her leadership. She thought of the long nights she had worked, coding alone under the flicker of a borrowed desk lamp while neighbors argued through the walls. She thought of the letters of rejection she used to pin to her corkboard, each one a reminder of where she wasn't welcome. Her throat tightened. How many times had she been told to step aside? How many times had she obeyed, Lorraine leaned her head back against the seat, her voice barely a whisper, even to herself. Not today. She tapped the side of her smartwatch once, casually, as though checking the time. Deep in the network beneath the terminal, an encrypted signal activated. It was silent, invisible to everyone else on the plane. But it was the first move in a game they didn't even realize they were playing. Nora strolled past again, pausing to ask Trevor if he needed anything else. Lorraine caught the faint sound of her words. "She's just looking for attention?" Lorraine's lips curved in the faintest smile, not of amusement, but of clarity. She had been underestimated her entire life, and that underestimation had always been her greatest weapon. From the row ahead, Maya adjusted her phone and whispered to herself for her vlog. This is not right. I'm gonna keep filming." Lorraine's gaze softened. She thought of the younger generation kids like Maya who would inherit this world. She didn't want them to carry the same scars she did. If she had the power to change even a fraction of it, then maybe silence wasn't an option anymore. She clasped her hands together, resting them on her lap. Her heart beat even, outwardly. She looked composed. Another passenger resigned to a bad seat. Inwardly, she was sharpening her resolve. Trevor's laughter rang out again, hollow and sharp, echoing in the cabin. Lorraine opened her eyes, steady and unblinking. 30 minutes, she thought. That's all it will take. 30 minutes. And this humiliation will no longer be mine. It will be theirs. The plane had leveled out at 35,000 feet, but inside, Lorraine felt the atmosphere tighten like a noose. The hum of the engines was steady. The cabin lights dimmed to a soft golden glow, yet tension wrapped around her seat like a shadow. Nora Whitfield moved up and down the aisle with the brisk steps of someone who wanted to remind everyone of her authority. Every time she passed Lorraine's row, her eyes flicked over, cold and dismissive, as though Lorraine were an intruder who had slipped past the gate. From her seat in the back, Lorraine had a clear view of first class. Trevor Langford, settled comfortably in 2A, reclined with his shoes off, sipping champagne, occasionally gesturing animatedly at his phone screen as though his conversations were the most important thing on earth. Each movement seemed choreographed for the audience around him. Lorraine's smartwatch buzzed once against her wrist. It wasn't a text, not exactly. It was her system, a subtle ping from the encrypted channel she had activated earlier. She glanced at it briefly. A message flashed, systems primed, awaiting command. She let her hand fall casually back into her lap, as though nothing had happened. Maya Collins shifted in her seat 2 rows ahead, her phone angled just right, catching pieces of the drama. Lorraine caught a snippet of her whisper as she spoke to the small microphone pinned discreetly to her jacket. "You all are seeing this, right? This woman is being treated like she doesn't belong, and she's not even saying anything back. Just holding it in." Lorraine felt her throat tighten. There was a strange comfort in knowing the story was being documented, that her humiliation would not vanish unseen, but part of her wrestled with unease. Did she want her pain broadcast to strangers, or was it necessary? The price for change. A memory surfaced: her mother, standing in their narrow kitchen back in Newark, stirring collard greens on the stove. Lorraine. Sometimes the only way people learn the truth is when someone forces them to look. Her mother's voice was soft but unyielding, like a prayer pressed into her heart. Nora stopped abruptly at Lorraine's row, holding a tray with bottles of water. She didn't look at Lorraine. Instead, she leaned toward the man across the aisle, a white-haired businessman in a navy suit. "Would you like a water, sir?" Her voice dripped with exaggerated kindness. Lorraine spoke gently. "May I have one as well?" Nora turned her head slightly, her smile gone. "We're short on supplies. First class only." Then she walked away, tray rattling faintly. The businessman frowned, his eyes flicking between them. He didn't say anything, but Lorraine noticed the discomfort ripple across his face. From the jump seat near the galley, Ethan Ward shifted uncomfortably. His gaze lingered on Lorraine for a fraction longer this time, as if silently apologizing for what he had just witnessed. He tapped something into a small tablet, then lowered it quickly when Nora passed by. Trevor's voice rose from the front cabin. "Can you believe they even let her board?" he said loudly to another passenger, not bothering to lower his tone. "No standards anymore. That's why airlines are falling apart. You pay for first class. You should get first class, not—" His eyes flicked back toward Lorraine. Dismissive and cruel, not charity cases. A couple in the nearby row shifted uncomfortably. The woman whispered something to her husband, who gave a half shrug. Their silence felt heavy, like an invisible second insult. Lorraine's hands clasped together, her knuckles white for a moment before she consciously loosened them. She breathed in slowly, then exhaled. "Stay calm. Stay measured. The storm is building, but it doesn't have to sweep you away. You are the one holding the reins." She turned her head toward the window. Below, the quilt of clouds stretched endless, sun casting a blinding silver sheen. It looked peaceful out there, so deceptively peaceful compared to the chaos in her chest. Her mind churned. What would the shareholders think if they saw her like this? What would her employees feel? Knowing their leader was being belittled in public, would she look weak for not fighting back? Or would she look reckless for retaliating too strongly? The weight of those questions pressed heavily. But beneath them was something stronger. Conviction. This isn't just about you, Lorraine. This is about every girl who was told she didn't belong. Every woman pushed to the back. Every black passenger made to feel invisible. If you let this go, you're telling them it's acceptable. She glanced again at her watch. The system was waiting. The captain's voice came over the intercom, calm and routine. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're cruising at 35,000 feet. Smooth air ahead. Expected arrival in New York is on time. About 40 minutes from now." Lorraine felt a surge of irony. On time, everything in her life had been about timing, when to speak, when to stay silent, when to push, when to let go. Timing had built her empire. And now, timing would dismantle the arrogance around her. Nora returned once more, this time pausing near Lorraine with a clipped smile. "If you're uncomfortable, ma'am, we can arrange for you to disembark at the next stop, but you'll have to cover your own rebooking fees." Lorraine raised her eyes, calm but steady. "This flight isn't making a stop." Nora's lips tightened. "Then perhaps you should sit quietly and stop disturbing our guests." "Your guests," Lorraine corrected softly. "I am one too." For a moment, their eyes locked. Nora's carried the smugness of someone who thought she had already won. Lorraine's carried something else entirely, patience, sharpened into a blade. Trevor chuckled from the front. "Oh, she's good. Maybe she should try stand-up comedy." Laughter rippled from a few seats. Not many, but enough to sting. Lorraine looked around the cabin. She noticed how some passengers stared at their phones, pretending not to see. Others darted guilty glances, caught between discomfort and complicity. And then, just for a second, she caught Maya's gaze again. The young woman mouthed silently, "We're with you." That was enough. Lorraine leaned back, her posture relaxed but her mind alight. She tapped her watch once more, the motion disguised as a stretch of her wrist. The system responded instantly. Command confirmed. Countdown, 30 minutes. The engines roared steady outside. But to Lorraine, they sounded different now, like drums beating toward a reckoning. She closed her eyes briefly, whispering words only she could hear. Make them see. Make them remember. When she opened them, she wasn't just a passenger anymore. She was the storm they didn't see coming. The minutes ticked by, but the tension in the cabin didn't ease. If anything, it thickened, becoming almost tangible. Lorraine sat with her hands folded neatly in her lap, her body outwardly composed, her mind working with a quiet precision. Each vibration of her smartwatch was like a heartbeat, a reminder that something was moving beneath the surface, something no one else could see. Trevor Langford called for his third glass of champagne. His voice carried across the cabin. You know, Nora. It's refreshing when airlines keep standards high. Too many places bend to political correctness these days. It's about time someone enforced the rules. Nora laughed lightly, glancing toward Lorraine with a look that was half triumph, half warning. We do our best, sir. Certain passengers can be challenging. The words landed like tiny knives, slicing away at the invisible layer of dignity Lorraine had tried to preserve. She felt the familiar burn of humiliation rise, but she pressed it down, layer by layer, like a seasoned pianist pressing notes into silence. Her gaze wandered toward the window again. Clouds drifted below, vast and weightless. She remembered a line from a book her father once gave her. Long before the world had taken him, the sky belongs to everyone. Child, don't let them convince you otherwise. She blinked back, the sting in her eyes. Maya Collins, 2 rows ahead, leaned toward her phone and whispered, They're still ignoring her. She's in the right, and they're treating her like she's invisible. I'm not turning this off. The world has to see this. Lorraine admired the young woman's courage. For Maya, this was instinct. For Lorraine, it had been a lifetime of calculation. Speaking out always carried a price. The difference was, Lorraine had reached a place where she could afford to pay it. From the galley. Ethan Ward shifted uneasily. His job as a technician didn't require him to interact with passengers, but he had witnessed enough discrimination behind the scenes to know when a line had been crossed. He fiddled with his tablet, hesitating, then finally set it down as if making a decision. His eyes caught Lorraine's for a fleeting second. He gave a barely perceptible nod. It was the smallest act of solidarity, but it meant more than words. Lorraine inhaled deeply, steadying herself. The countdown ticked away on her watch, 20 minutes left. Her decision had already been made, but her mind wrestled with the magnitude of it. If I act, this airline will face a storm it can't contain. People will lose jobs. Systems will grind to a halt. Am I ready to carry the weight of their downfall, or am I simply giving them what they've given me? Humiliation dressed as procedure? The voice of her mother returned, low and unwavering. You are not punishing them, Lorraine. You are teaching them. Justice is not vengeance. It is setting the scales right. She opened her eyes. The conviction settled over her like a second skin. Nora returned to her row again, this time stopping directly in front of her. Her arms were folded across her chest. Ma'am, passengers have complained you're making them uncomfortable. If you can't sit quietly, I'll have no choice but to escalate this. Lorraine tilted her head slightly, her voice calm but piercing. Escalate to what? To the captain, Nora said firmly. Do it, Lorraine replied. The sudden confidence in her tone startled Nora. For a moment, the attendant hesitated, as though she'd expected resistance, but not acceptance. Then, with a sharp turn, she marched toward the cockpit. Maya whispered audibly to her phone, "She's not afraid. She's standing her ground." Trevor leaned back in 2A, smirking. "She'll be escorted off when we land." "About time." The words buzzed in Lorraine's ears, but she no longer felt diminished by them. Instead, she felt clarity. They had mistaken her silence for weakness, but silence, she knew, could also be strategy. Her watch pulsed once more. 15 minutes. In the cockpit, murmurs could be heard as Nora explained her version of events. Lorraine imagined the captain, weighing words carefully, thinking of protocols and paperwork. But even captains had limits. They didn't control the infrastructure running beneath their wings. Back in the cabin, passengers fidgeted. The man in the navy suit leaned toward Trevor. "You shouldn't say things like that out loud. People are recording." Trevor shrugged, arrogance radiating. "Let them. Nothing's going to happen." Lorraine's lips curved in a faint smile. "Oh, Trevor, you've built your life on the assumption that nothing will happen. That is why everything is about to—" Ethan stood suddenly, excusing himself to the galley. His tablet glowed briefly as he keyed in a code only employees knew. Systems blinked in acknowledgement, aligning with Lorraine's signal. The unseen web connecting their actions tightened. The captain's voice finally returned over the intercom, tone carefully neutral. "Ladies and gentlemen, we ask for your cooperation as we address a small matter in the cabin. We'll keep you updated." Lorraine heard the tension buried beneath the words. He didn't know yet what storm was brewing beyond his cockpit. Her watch buzzed again. 10 minutes. She closed her eyes for a moment, replaying the years behind her, the derisive laughter from venture capitalists who once told her no one would invest in a black woman's tech company, the whispers when she became the youngest CEO on the East Coast, the veiled comments about being so articulate as though it were a surprise. Every memory layered onto this one moment, crystallizing into resolve. She opened her eyes, fixed them on the seat she should have been in 2A. Trevor shifted, sipping the last of his champagne, completely oblivious. Her voice was soft, but steady as she whispered to herself, "The scales tip now." The countdown ticked closer. 9 minutes. 8. Maya glanced back once more, eyes wide with unspoken questions. Lorraine gave her the faintest nod, a silent message of reassurance. "Watch. You'll understand." The cabin felt suspended, as though time itself was holding its breath. Even the air seemed charged, heavy with anticipation. Trevor leaned back, closing his eyes, satisfied. Nora emerged from the cockpit, her chin raised as though she had won. "The captain will be speaking to you shortly," she said, with a smugness that rang hollow. Lorraine didn't flinch. Her eyes flicked to her watch. 5 minutes, she whispered once more, almost like a prayer. "Make them see." The engines hummed steadily, but something else moved now. Something invisible, undeniable, unstoppable. The reckoning was no longer a thought. It was almost here. The cabin lights dimmed further, the golden glow replaced with a cool bluish tint as the flight attendants prepared for the next service. For most passengers, it was a routine flight. For Lorraine Bennett, it was the prelude to a reckoning she could already feel vibrating beneath her skin. Her watch buzzed again, soft, rhythmic, like the quiet countdown of a clock only she could hear. 4 minutes. She leaned back, her head resting against the seat, eyes fixed on the ceiling above her. Every muscle in her body was calm, deliberate. The image she projected was one of resignation, perhaps even defeat, but inside, Her mind was a web of motion calculations, commands, consequences weaving together with precision. Nora Whitfield returned from the cockpit, her posture upright, her face triumphant. She leaned toward Trevor Langford and spoke just loud enough for others to hear. "The captain will address her once we land. Procedures are procedures." Trevor chuckled, shaking his head as if amused by the inevitability of her downfall. "Knew it. Some people never learn their place." He raised his empty glass, signaling for another drink. Lorraine's eyes flicked briefly toward the galley. Ethan Ward stood there, pretending to organize equipment. His eyes met hers for a fleeting second, a silent acknowledgement. He knew something was coming, even if he didn't know exactly what. Maya Collins clutched her phone, whispering into the small microphone attached to her collar, "She's so calm. It's like she knows something the rest of us don't. I can feel it in the air. Something's about to happen." Lorraine closed her eyes, the corners of her lips softening into the faintest smile. She whispered silently, so quietly that no one else could hear, "Yes, child. You'll see. 3 minutes." The engines hummed a steady rhythm outside, but to Lorraine it was no longer background noise. It was percussion, building toward a crescendo. She thought of her father's words, "The sky belongs to everyone." The injustice of this moment weighed on her, but so did the power she carried. 2 minutes. She glanced at Trevor again. His arrogance seemed endless, filling the space around him like smoke. He was laughing at a meme on his phone now, oblivious to the storm inches away. Nora hovered nearby, smiling too wide, still certain she had won. Lorraine inhaled deeply, steady and slow, her pulse matching the countdown. "This is not vengeance, Lorraine. This is justice. You are not tearing them down. You are forcing them to face the truth. 1 minute." The cabin was quiet except for the occasional rustle of magazines and the muted click of seatbelts. Passengers leaned into their screens, unaware. Only a few "My Ethan" and the businessman in the navy suit watched Lorraine with an unspoken awareness. They sensed the gravity, even if they didn't yet understand it. Her watch vibrated once more. "Execute." Lorraine tilted her wrist slightly, her finger brushing the invisible command on the touchscreen. She tapped once. The world outside remained unchanged, the clouds still endless, the engine still steady but inside the airline's network. Something shifted. The first sign was subtle. The cabin intercom crackled mid-sentence as Nora tried to make an announcement. "Ladies," and the words dissolved into static before the system fell silent. Nora frowned, tapping the handset as though it were a toy that had stopped working. Trevor glanced up briefly, then shrugged. Old planes, always breaking down. Lorraine didn't move. She simply folded her hands on her lap and waited. The next ripple came seconds later. Cabin screens flickered, the airline logo replaced with a blank gray square. Then, one by one, they rebooted, stalling on a black screen that read "Error Network Unavailable." A murmur spread among the passengers. "What's going on?" someone asked from row 5. "My movie just shut off," said another. Nora's face tightened. She grabbed the handset again, pressed the buttons harder, but the intercom remained dead. Lorraine's watch buzzed again. Stage 1 complete. She kept her face calm, neutral. Only her eyes revealed the fire burning behind them. Ethan stood abruptly from the galley, pretending to check the overhead bins. But Lorraine saw his subtle glance at her wrist. He understood now something bigger than routine malfunctions was underway. The captain's voice suddenly came over the loudspeaker. But this time it wasn't calm. His tone carried confusion, even unease. Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some technical difficulties with our communication systems. Nothing to be alarmed about. We'll update you as soon as we can. Trevor laughed, loud and careless. See, this is what happens when you let anyone on board. Bad luck travels. His words, careless as smoke, drifted toward Lorraine. She finally turned her head, meeting his eyes directly for the first time since boarding. Her voice was quiet, deliberate. Luck had nothing to do with it. Trevor blinked, confused, his smirk faltering for just a second. Lorraine shifted her gaze back to the window, her reflection faint in the glass. This isn't bad luck. This is accountability. Passengers stirred. The businessman in the navy suit leaned forward slightly, whispering to his wife. She knows something. Nora stormed down the aisle, her heels clicking like a metronome of frustration. She stopped at Lorraine's row, her voice low but sharp. What did you do? Lorraine's eyes rose slowly, calm and unshaken. I reminded your system who built it. Nora's mouth opened, then closed again. Confusion rippled across her face, quickly replaced by disbelief. You can't. Lorraine leaned forward slightly, her tone soft, almost compassionate. When you tore up my boarding pass, Nora, you didn't just humiliate me. You humiliated the woman who designed the backbone of your airline's operations. The seat was mine not because I bought it, but because I built the system that made it possible for you to sell it. Nora's skin flushed red, her composure slipping. Maya whispered breathlessly to her phone. She's the CEO. She's the one who runs the system. Oh my God, this is bigger than I thought. Ethan, silent until now, stepped closer, his voice low but firm. She's telling the truth. I've seen her name on the contracts. Aerolink runs everything we do. Reservations, crew schedules, the works. Nora stumbled back, momentarily speechless. Trevor leaned forward, scowling. This is insane. You're bluffing. Lorraine didn't even look at him. She raised her wrist slightly, and the cabin lights flickered twice, plunging the plane into brief darkness before restoring. Gas rippled across the rows. Her eyes met Trevor's again, calm, unwavering. Still think I'm bluffing. The air inside the cabin shifted. Passengers who had been silent now leaned forward, curiosity replacing indifference. A few began murmuring, pulling out their phones despite the spotty Wi-Fi. Lorraine sat back, composed as ever. She spoke softly, but the weight of her words filled the space. I asked for nothing more than the seat I purchased. You chose to deny me that. Now, I will deny you the illusion that this system was ever truly yours to control. The cabin was silent, save for the steady drone of engines. Even Trevor had no retort. Her watch buzzed again. Stage 2, ready, awaiting confirmation. Lorraine's lips curved in the faintest of smiles, though her eyes carried no malice, only resolve. She whispered to herself, the lesson begins now. The silence that followed Lorraine's last words was unlike anything the cabin had experienced before. Not even the steady hum of the engines could mask the tension now. Every passenger, whether openly watching or pretending to stay busy on their devices, had turned into an unwilling witness. The atmosphere felt heavy, charged, as though the plane itself sensed it was caught between ordinary flight and extraordinary consequence. Nora Whitfield stood frozen in the aisle, her hands clenching and unclenching at her sides. Her face betrayed the flicker of panic she tried to suppress. The smirk that had been her shield for so long was gone, replaced by the unmistakable realization that she had miscalculated. Trevor Langford, however, wasn't ready to give up his arrogance. He leaned forward in 2A, his voice dripping disdain. Do you really expect us to believe you're in control of this plane? That's absurd. If you were as important as you claim, you wouldn't be sitting back there next to the bathroom, would you? His laugh was sharp, desperate. You're bluffing, lady. Lorraine didn't even turn her head toward him. She sat upright, her voice calm and deliberate. You mistake humility for weakness, Trevor, and you mistake privilege for power. That's the problem with men like you. You think the world runs because you demand it. But the truth is, it runs because people like me built the systems that carry it. Her words fell like stones into a pond, rippling through the cabin. A middle-aged woman in row 6 shifted uncomfortably, her eyes softening as she looked back at Lorraine. The businessman in the navy suit whispered something to his wife, his expression troubled. For the first time since boarding, the narrative was shifting not just in Lorraine's mind, but in the minds of those around her. Her watch buzzed again. Stage 2 initiated. The overhead lights flickered once more, dimming lower than before. The seatbelt signs illuminated and stayed locked. Regardless of altitude, the in-flight entertainment system, which had already frozen, now displayed a single line of text across every screen: passenger equity protocol engaged. Gas erupted across the cabin. What does that mean? Someone asked nervously. Is this some kind of hack? Another muttered. Nora's eyes darted frantically toward the cockpit. She turned on her heel and hurried forward, disappearing behind the locked door. The passengers whispered louder now, panic mingling with curiosity. Trevor slammed his hand against the armrest. This is insane. Somebody stop her. This can't be allowed to happen. Lorraine finally turned to look at him, her gaze steady, almost pitying. What's insane, Trevor, is believing you can humiliate people endlessly without consequence. What's insane is thinking systems built on exclusion can keep running forever. You've lived your whole life assuming accountability would never reach you. Consider this your introduction. Trevor opened his mouth, but no words came. He sat back hard in his seat, his face flushed. From the front of the cabin, the intercom crackled to life. The captain's voice carried urgency this time. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Rhodes. We're experiencing what appears to be an internal systems override. Our communications are being rerouted. Please remain calm while we assess the situation. The murmurs grew louder. A young man in row 8 pulled out his phone, shaking his head. This is going viral. If the Wi-Fi comes back, this is going everywhere. It already was. Maya Collins, still recording quietly, whispered, It's live. My stream is pushing through. Thousands are watching. Her hands trembled slightly, but her eyes shone with determination. They're seeing everything. Lorraine caught her words and felt a strange mixture of weight and relief. It wasn't just her anymore. The humiliation they had tried to bury was now immortalized, uncontainable. She thought of the young women who might watch this later, who might finally see someone refuse to be diminished. Her watch pulsed again. Stage 2 complete, awaiting escalation. Lorraine sat back, breathing evenly. Her mind was clear now. The inner struggle, the worry about being too harsh, too disruptive, was gone. In its place was a sense of inevitability. This wasn't about revenge. It was about rewriting the rules in real time. Ethan Ward emerged again from the galley, his face pale. He approached quietly, crouching near her row so as not to draw too much attention. His voice was barely above a whisper. You're really doing this, aren't you? Lorraine met his eyes. You already knew I could. He hesitated, then nodded slowly. I've seen the contracts. I knew Airlink handled most of the systems. I didn't think anyone at the top would ever pull the trigger. Lorraine's expression softened. When the people entrusted with power abuse it, silence makes you complicit. I won't be complicit. Ethan swallowed hard, then gave her a quick nod before retreating back toward the galley. The businessman in Navy finally spoke aloud, his voice carrying enough to be heard. I think we should all just calm down. Maybe we should listen to her. His wife touched his arm, nodding in agreement. Trevor exploded. Are you kidding me? She's hijacking the entire flight. And you want to listen to her? She's dangerous. Lorraine turned her gaze on Trevor one last time, her voice like steel wrapped in velvet. The only dangerous thing here is your assumption that your comfort matters more than anyone else's dignity. The cabin fell silent again. Even those who hadn't cared before now stared at her with quiet recognition. Something was changing. Her watch buzzed again. Stage 3 prepared. Confirm escalation. Lorraine hesitated for the briefest moment. This was the final step. With one tap, she wouldn't just expose this incident. She would ground the airline itself, forcing every executive, every shareholder, every employee to reckon with what had happened here. Her heart tightened. Do I press it? Am I ready for the fallout? Am I willing to carry the weight of this disruption on my shoulders? Her father's voice returned, steady as ever. The sky belongs to everyone. Make them see it. She tapped the watch. The cabin lights blinked out entirely for a split second before emergency lights flickered on. The engines remained steady, but a new announcement filled the screens. All North Sky Airlines flights suspended, pending passenger equity review. Shock rippled like thunder. What all flights a woman gasped. They can't do that, muttered a man. That's thousands of people stranded. Lorraine's voice carried evenly, almost gentle. They can, and they will, because the cost of humiliation can no longer be hidden. Not this time. Nora burst out of the cockpit, her face pale with fury. You've shut us down. Do you have any idea what you've done? Lorraine's gaze softened. I've reminded your airline that dignity isn't optional. It's the foundation. Without it, your systems don't run. The captain's voice returned, strained, but respectful this time. Dr. Bennett? Aerolink confirmed your command. We're instructed to divert and land at the nearest available airport. Please, if you'd like to address the cabin, you have the floor. All eyes turned to Lorraine. She rose slowly from her cramped seat, straightening her blazer. She didn't need a stage. The aisle became her platform. Her voice carried with quiet strength. I boarded this plane with nothing more than a boarding pass and the right to sit in the seat I purchased. That right was denied because someone decided I didn't belong. This isn't just about me. This is about every person who's been told to step aside, to stay silent, to accept humiliation as the price of existing. Today, we stop pretending that's acceptable. The cabin was hushed, every word sinking deep. Even Trevor was silent, his face pale, his arrogance cracked. Lorraine continued, her voice unwavering. This flight will land safely, but the system that allowed this will not continue as before. Because systems built on exclusion collapse eventually either by their own weight or by the hands of those who refuse to be erased. Applause began softly from Maya first, then the businessman in Navy, then a ripple through the cabin. It wasn't unanimous, but it didn't need to be. The point had been made. Lorraine sat back down, her hands steady in her lap. Her watch buzzed one last time. Grounding confirmed. North Sky Airlines operations suspended. She exhaled slowly. her eyes on the clouds outside. She felt the burden of what she had unleashed, but also the clarity of knowing it was necessary. The humiliation she had endured had become the spark for something far larger. Maya's voice whispered into her phone, trembling with awe. "You just witnessed history." Lorraine closed her eyes. History wasn't the goal. Justice was. By the time Flight 227 touched down in Cleveland for its emergency diversion, the story had already left the cabin and gone global. News outlets were streaming shaky passenger videos, hashtags were trending, and financial tickers were flashing red. North Sky Airline stock, once considered steady as steel, was plunging in real time. Lorraine Bennett sat quietly as the plane taxied to a halt. Her seatbelt still buckled, her expression unreadable. She could hear passengers whispering, phones buzzing with alerts, a low murmur of disbelief spreading like wildfire. Maya's livestream had topped 1 million viewers before they even touched the ground. When the cabin door finally opened, security officers boarded, but their demeanor was cautious, almost deferential. One of them, a tall officer with kind eyes, simply asked, "Dr. Bennett, corporate headquarters has requested your presence." The title on his lips caught in the air. Passengers exchanged glances. Dr. Bennett. She wasn't just anyone. She was someone. Nora Whitfield avoided Lorraine's gaze as she was quietly escorted out another exit, her face drawn tight. Trevor Langford, still red with rage, muttered complaints under his breath. But no one listened now. His voice, once so commanding, was drowned beneath the roar of a larger story. Within an hour, Lorraine was seated in a sleek black sedan cutting through downtown Cleveland, toward a skyscraper that glimmered with North Sky's blue logo. Ethan Ward had slipped into the car beside her, his badge still clipped to his belt. His hands fidgeted in his lap. "They'll try to spin this," he said quietly. "They'll call it a technical malfunction or an unauthorized stunt. They'll try to bury the truth." Lorraine's gaze stayed fixed on the skyline. "They can try, but lies don't survive daylight, Ethan, and daylight is pouring in faster than they can shut the blinds." Inside headquarters, panic reigned, screens lit up with graphs plunging, social media storms rolling, anchors speculating. In the top-floor boardroom, executives scrambled to contain the collapse. At the head of the long mahogany table sat CEO Richard Callahan, his jaw clenched, his hand wrapped so tightly around a glass of water that it threatened to crack. "This is a nightmare," he barked. "One incident, one woman, and we are bleeding out in public. She's not just one woman." Denise Warren, the CFO, corrected sharply. "She's Lorraine Bennett, CEO of Aerolink Systems, the very vendor that built the digital infrastructure we depend on. Every booking, every message, every aircraft dispatch touches her software. We've essentially insulted the architect of our own foundation." A silence followed, heavy and damning. The general counsel shifted uncomfortably. "We need a legal firewall. Deny responsibility. Push this back on rogue employees. The flight attendant, the manager, terminate them immediately and announce it." Denise's eyes narrowed. "That won't work. The recordings show more than rogue behavior. They show systemic bias, tolerated from the top down. If we scapegoat the front line, we only prove her point." The room erupted with overlapping voices. Executives argued strategy, debated PR tactics, clung to fragments of control. But beneath the noise was the undeniable truth: their power was slipping, and the ground beneath them was crumbling. When the double doors finally opened, all conversation ceased. Lorraine stepped inside, her presence quiet yet commanding. Ethan followed a pace behind, his eyes lowered. The board members shifted uneasily, some in defensiveness, others in shame. Richard forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Dr. Bennett, thank you for coming. Let's discuss how we can resolve this unpleasantness." Lorraine placed her phone gently on the table, her hands folded. Her voice was calm, but carried through the room with weight. "This isn't unpleasantness, Mr. Callahan. This is accountability. For years, your airline has operated with a culture of exclusion downgrades based on appearance, profiling disguised as policy, humiliation normalized as standard procedure. Today, you were caught, and now the world is watching." Richard leaned forward, his tone clipped. "And what exactly is it you want? Dr. Bennett, money, a contract renegotiation. What's the ransom here?" Lorraine's gaze didn't waver. "I don't want your money. I want your reform. Immediate, structural, and transparent. Fire the individuals responsible, yes, but also dismantle the policies that enabled them. Institute independent oversight. Establish a passenger equity council with real authority. Train every employee, from gate agent to board member, in anti-discrimination practices, and make the results public." The room bristled. A few scoffed. Others shifted uncomfortably. Richard's jaw tightened. "You're asking us to hand over the company." "No," Lorraine replied softly. "I'm asking you to save it." Denise spoke then, her voice cutting through the tension. "She's right. If we resist, we die. If we cooperate, we might survive this." Richard shot her a glare, but the room's silence confirmed it. The tide was turning. Lorraine reached for her phone, tapped a command. Screens around the room lit up, displaying internal documents, the very files Ethan and Elena had uncovered. Seat reassignment logs disproportionately affecting passengers of color, complaint suppression memos marked resolved without action, internal jokes, mocking names and tones, evidence undeniable and damning. "Do you think you can bury this?" Lorraine asked, her voice low. It's already with regulators, with the press, with your shareholders. The only question left is whether you stand on the right side of history or become its cautionary tale." Richard sank back into his chair, his face ashen. "And if we agree to this circus, what then? Do you play hero while we dismantle ourselves?" Lorraine's expression softened, though her resolve did not. "I don't want to destroy North Sky. I want to see it rebuilt into something worth flying. A system where dignity is standard, not optional. If you choose that path, I'll help you. If you don't, the system I built will ensure your collapse anyway. The choice is yours." The silence that followed was deafening. For once, no one argued, no one dismissed her. They all knew the truth. She held the power, not through threat, but through undeniable reality. Denise finally spoke, steady and clear. "I move. We accept Dr. Bennett's terms immediately." The room hesitated, but one by one, hands rose. Even those who despised the humiliation recognized survival when it was offered. Richard's hand was the last. He stared at Lorraine, his eyes burning with pride wounded, but also fear. At last, slowly, he raised it. "It's settled," Denise declared. Lorraine rose from her seat, gathering her phone. "Good. Then let's begin." As she walked out of the boardroom, the weight of the moment pressed against her chest. She wasn't triumphant. She wasn't relieved. She was resolved, because this was only the beginning, and the fight for dignity was far from over. Outside the headquarters of North Sky Airlines, The storm was not just metaphorical. Protesters had gathered in the plaza, their voices echoing against the glass facade, carrying signs that read, "Dignity in the skies and bias doesn't fly." Cameras flashed, journalists shouted questions, and the rhythm of chants shook the building's polished calm. Lorraine Bennett stood near a window on the 25th floor, watching the crowd with a quiet stillness. The boardroom session had ended only hours before, but the ripple of that meeting was already a tidal wave outside. She could see Maya Collins in the front row of protesters, holding her phone high, still streaming to thousands. The girl's face was a mix of fury and conviction, her voice breaking through the crowd. "We fly with respect, or we don't fly at all, behind Lorraine." Denise Warren was already drafting a press release, her voice firm as she dictated to her assistant. Richard Callahan sat slumped in a chair in the corner, shoulders heavy, eyes fixed on the carpet as if the patterns there might offer escape. Ethan Ward lingered nearby. His loyalty conflicted, though his eyes found reassurance whenever they landed on Lorraine. The room smelled faintly of stale coffee and panic. Lorraine finally turned back to the table, her voice quiet but carrying weight. "What happens outside these walls depends on what you do in here. The crowd doesn't want apologies. They want proof, tangible, structural change." Richard rubbed his temples. "We've already agreed to reforms. Isn't that enough?" Lorraine's gaze held his. "Enough for you, maybe, but not for them. Not for the people who've been humiliated in your terminals, your cabins, your so-called elite lounges. The world has seen their pain now. Words won't patch that wound. Actions will." Ethan cleared his throat, surprising himself. "She's right. I've seen the reports buried in servers. Families marked as risk profiles because of their names. Passengers shuffled to the back under vague excuses. It wasn't policy, it was practice, and it was tolerated. If we want to stop bleeding, we need to admit the wound exists." For a moment, the room was silent. Then Denise set down her pen. "Dr. Bennett, what do you suggest?" Lorraine exhaled slowly. Her mind turned not to strategy first, but to memory. She thought of her mother, who worked double shifts at a hospital and still managed to sit with her at the kitchen table, drilling algebra problems late into the night. She thought of her father, who once drove her past Newark Airport and said, "One day, you'll fly out of here as someone important." She thought of every indignity swallowed in silence, each one a stone added to the mountain she had climbed. "I suggest we face the truth head-on," she said finally, "not behind closed doors, not with sanitized statements. Hold a press conference tonight. Admit fault. Announce the reforms publicly. And stand beside those who've suffered, not above them. I'll speak too, but as a partner in rebuilding, not your shield." Richard bristled. "A public confession. That's corporate suicide." Denise shook her head. "It's survival. We hide. We die. We step forward. We might live." Lorraine looked past them, her voice softer now. "You call it suicide. I call it honesty. And honesty is the only runway left for you." By evening, floodlights washed over the steps of the North Sky Tower. A podium had been set up, microphones bristling like porcupine quills. Crowds pressed against barricades. Reporters jostled for position. Drones hovered in the crisp night air. The city skyline glowed behind them, a silent witness. Richard stood at the podium first, his expression carved from stone. He cleared his throat. The feedback sharpened the speakers. "Tonight, North Sky Airlines acknowledges a failure not of one flight or one attendant, but of a culture that tolerated bias and exclusion for too long." We allowed practices that undermined the dignity of our passengers. For that, we are accountable. Effective immediately. North Sky will institute independent oversight, mandatory training, and a passenger equity council with real authority. His voice faltered on the last word. Cameras clicked furiously. Murmurs ran through the crowd. Then Richard stepped back. Lorraine walked forward. She did not adjust the microphone. She simply stood, her posture calm, her eyes steady on the crowd. My name is Dr. Lorraine Bennett. I am the woman you saw denied a seat she paid for. But this is not just about me. It is about countless others who've been silenced, dismissed, and diminished while traveling. A father in Detroit pulled aside because his accent made someone uncomfortable. A mother in Atlanta told to move so a platinum member could spread out. A teenager in Chicago humiliated for the color of his skin. Her voice deepened with emotion, but never cracked. Tonight, North Sky is pledging change, but promises only matter if they live beyond tonight. I intend to hold them to every word. And I ask you passengers, employees, citizens, to do the same, because dignity is not a privilege, it is a right. The plaza erupted in applause, not the polite kind, but the raw, rolling kind that carries conviction. Lorraine stepped back, the cameras catching the glint in her eyes, not tears, but resolve. Later, in the quiet of a back hallway, Ethan found her leaning against a wall, her phone buzzing endlessly in her hand. That was something, he said awkwardly. Lorraine managed a small smile. It was necessary. Do you think they'll keep their word? She looked past him, toward the darkened city beyond the glass. They don't have a choice, and if they forget, the world won't let them. In that moment, fatigue tugged at her bones. She wanted nothing more than to be home, to sit at her kitchen table with a cup of tea, to breathe in peace. But she also knew the fight was far from over. Reform was never a single speech, a single vote, a single press release. It was 1,000 steps taken, one after another, against resistance that never truly disappeared. Her phone buzzed again, another message from shareholders demanding a meeting, from activists asking her to lead, from strangers thanking her for standing firm. Lorraine closed her eyes briefly. The weight of expectation pressed heavy, but beneath it was something else, an ember of hope. Tomorrow would bring more battles, more scrutiny, more doubts. But tonight, she had cracked the facade, and through the crack, the light was spilling in. The morning after the press conference, North Sky's tower felt like a building suspended between two worlds. Inside, the air was heavy with exhaustion. Outside, sunlight poured down on the plaza still littered with handmade signs, water bottles, and traces of last night's crowd. Lorraine Bennett sat in a quiet conference room with the blinds half drawn. For the first time since the confrontation at the gate, she was alone with her thoughts. Her phone was still buzzing messages from allies, invitations from networks, calls from politicians who now wanted to align with her stance. She had expected the flood. What she hadn't expected was the silence inside her own chest, a quiet ache that came after the adrenaline drained away. She pressed her palm against the cool table and whispered to herself, was it enough? The memory of Nora Whitfield's smirk returned, the sound of her boarding pass tearing like fabric against her skin. Trevor Langford's mocking tone still echoed, who let her in here? This isn't a charity flight. She replayed those words, not because she wanted to, but because humiliation had a way of embedding itself deep, replaying even when victory had been claimed. There was a knock at the door. Denise Warren entered, a folder in her hand, her expression taut but composed. The board wants to meet again. This time, not about what we say, but about what we do. Lorraine nodded slowly. They're already doubting. Not doubting, Denise corrected. Floundering. They agreed to reforms, but none of them know how to implement them. And frankly, some are still hoping this will blow over if they just stall long enough. Lorraine leaned back, her eyes narrowing. Stalling isn't an option anymore. The world won't let them. Neither will I. Later that afternoon, the board gathered again. The room was smaller this time, stripped of the grandeur of the top-floor hall, perhaps deliberately, perhaps out of shame. Richard Callahan sat at the head, his face drawn, his tie loosened. He looked like a man trying to hold on to authority that had already slipped through his fingers. We can't give her full oversight, one director argued. She's an outsider. She's the only one who can keep us from collapse, Denise shot back. Richard's voice was rough, almost hoarse. Dr. Bennett, you've made your point, but let's be realistic. We can't dismantle decades of structure overnight. Lorraine's tone was calm, but the undercurrent was steel. You dismantled my dignity in 30 seconds. Don't tell me decades are needed for what is right. This isn't about speed, it's about sincerity. Either you act, or you expose yourselves as frauds. The word hung in the room like smoke. Fraud. Executives exchanged nervous glances. Ethan Ward, sitting quietly at the far end, finally spoke. She's right. I've seen the system from the inside. The logs, the data, they don't lie. People have been marked, shifted, sidelined for years. If we don't build safeguards now, all that evidence will surface, and we'll have nothing left to defend. Denise opened the folder she had carried in. Inside were documents Lorraine had helped prepare proposals for the Passenger Equity Council, independent audits, training modules, reporting hotlines. She spread them across the table like cards in a high-stakes game. This isn't abstract. It's a roadmap, and it's the only one we've got. Silence followed. The board members shifted, calculating risks against reality. Some bristled, some leaned forward, but none could deny the inevitability anymore. Richard finally exhaled, a long, weary sound. If we do this, the airline we knew is gone. Lorraine met his gaze, then let it go, because the airline the world saw last night is already dead. What rises next is up to you. The vote was slower this time, more reluctant, but hands went up one, then another, then a majority. Richard's hand hovered before finally lifting with resignation. It was done. Not the work itself, but the choice to begin. After the meeting, Lorraine stepped out into the evening air. The plaza was quieter now, only a handful of reporters lingering, their voices softer, almost respectful. Across the street, she saw Maya Collins leaning against a railing, her phone lowered for once. When she spotted Lorraine, she jogged over, her expression both nervous and eager. I just wanted to say, thank you, Maya said breathlessly. People like me. We've been trying to speak up, but no one listens. Last night, when you stood there and said dignity is a right, I swear, it felt like you were saying it for all of us. Lorraine smiled faintly. I wasn't speaking for you, Maya. I was speaking with you. And now it's on all of us to make sure those words become real. Maya's eyes shone, and for a moment, Lorraine saw not just a young vlogger, but the spark of a new generation carrying the flame forward. Later, alone in her hotel room, Lorraine sat by the window, city lights twinkling below. The weight of the day pressed against her chest. She thought of her father's words at that Newark curbside decades ago. She thought of every barrier that had tried to keep her grounded, every voice that had told her no. And she thought of the irony that the very system built to elevate some had tried to strip her of flight. Yet in their attempt, they had given her wings she hadn't realized were waiting. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from her mother. Short and simple. I saw you on TV. Proud doesn't even begin to cover it. Lorraine let herself breathe deeply. For the first time since the boarding gate, she allowed the corners of her lips to lift. Not a smile of victory, but of resilience. Tomorrow, the work would continue. Tomorrow, the fights would resume. But tonight, she allowed herself to feel the quiet truth she had turned humiliation into a movement. And through her, countless others had found their voices. The weeks that followed were unlike anything North Sky Airlines or Lorraine Bennett had ever known. What began as a viral humiliation had evolved into a full-blown cultural reckoning, the kind that reshaped more than just a corporation. It was no longer about a torn boarding pass or a denied seat. It was about rewriting the way dignity traveled through the skies. Lorraine found herself at the center of a storm she had not sought. Interviews, panels, invitations from universities and civil rights organizations poured in. Her face appeared on magazine covers with headlines like "The Woman Who Grounded the Skies in Power," "Grace," and "The Fight for Fairness." She did not bask in it. Fame had never been her pursuit. What mattered was whether the noise translated into change. Inside North Sky, the reforms she had demanded began to take root, though not without resistance. The Passenger Equity Council launched its first hearings, collecting testimony from travelers across the nation. Some stories broke hearts, a grandmother forced to stand in line for hours, while others were escorted past her. A veteran humiliated because his service dog was questioned more than his ticket. Each account was both a wound and a warning. Lorraine attended the first session quietly, sitting in the back row while others spoke. She wanted to listen, not dominate. She scribbled notes in the margin of her folder, her brow furrowed with both empathy and determination. During a break, Ethan Ward approached, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to her without a word. "You're becoming the face of this. You know," he said softly. Lorraine shook her head. "I'm just the spark. The flame belongs to them." Ethan studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Still, sparks matter. Without them, the fire never starts." Outside those halls, public reaction continued to swell. Travelers began sharing their own stories under a new hashtag, My Flight, My Dignity. Some posts were painful, others hopeful, all resonant. Airlines across the industry were forced to respond, issuing statements, initiating their own reviews. The domino effect had begun. Yet for all the progress, Lorraine wrestled with her own doubts. Late at night, when the city was quiet and her phone finally stopped buzzing, she wondered if she had done the right thing. Would the movement sustain, or would it fade like so many outrages before? Was she strong enough to keep carrying it? One evening, she returned to Newark, the city where her journey had begun. She walked past the small apartment building where she had once coded through the night, her fingers stiff from winter cold because the heater barely worked. She remembered staring out that same window, watching planes take off, wondering if she would ever have a place in those skies. Now, she had not only taken her place, she had forced the system to shift. But in the quiet of that street, she let herself feel the weight of her own exhaustion. She whispered to herself, You don't have to carry it all. Lorraine, just carry enough. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Maya Collins. The young vlogger had grown into an activist voice almost overnight, her platform expanding by the hour. They asked me to speak at the council next week. I don't know if I'm ready, Lorraine typed back. You're more ready than you think. Just speak the truth. That's all the world needs, Maya replied with a heart emoji, and Lorraine smiled faintly. Perhaps this was the answer to her doubt she didn't need to carry it alone. New voices were rising. A month later, North Sky held a groundbreaking ceremony for its new initiative, the Clear Sky Protocol. Lorraine stood alongside Richard Callahan and Denise Warren. Though the symbolism was striking this time, she was not behind them, but beside them, her hand on the shovel that turned the soil. The initiative promised full transparency, external oversight, and legally binding commitments to equity in travel. Reporters crowded the event. One shouted, "Dr. Bennett, do you forgive the airline for what happened to you?" Lorraine paused, the microphone catching the stillness of her breath. "Forgiveness," she said carefully, "isn't a gift you hand out cheaply. It's a process, and it belongs as much to the victim as to the offender. What I can say is this today: we've turned pain into purpose, and that is where healing begins." The words rippled through the audience, quiet but powerful. They weren't the soundbite of easy absolution. They were deeper, more real. After the ceremony, Denise approached her, her tone less corporate now, more personal. "You've changed this place. Lorraine, not just the airline, the people in it." Lorraine's eyes softened. "We've changed it. Denise, it took all of us to break the silence." That evening, she boarded a flight not as a protester, not as a reformer, but simply as a passenger. Seat 2A awaited her. As she placed her tote beneath the seat, she looked around the cabin. The attendants moved with a new attentiveness, their smiles more genuine, their interactions careful but human. She wondered if it would last. She hoped it would. The man seated beside her leaned over and said, "Dr. Bennett, thank you. My daughter told me what you did. She wants to be a pilot one day, because now she believes there's space for her in the sky." Lorraine turned to the window as the plane lifted. The city lights blurred beneath them, fading into the dark horizon. She thought of her father's words at the curbside decades ago, thought of her mother's quiet encouragement, thought of every battle she had fought along the way. And in that moment, as the plane pierced the clouds and the sky opened wide, she felt something she hadn't in a long time. Not just resolve, not just resilience, but hope. For perhaps the first time, the sky didn't feel like a barrier to fight against. It felt like it belonged to everyone. The story of Dr. Lorraine Bennett reminds us that true strength is not always in shouting louder, but in standing calmly, firmly, and with dignity. Many of us know what it feels like to be overlooked, dismissed, or underestimated. Perhaps it happened at work, at school, or even in a waiting room. These moments leave us with a choice: do we quietly accept, or do we rise without bitterness? But with courage, Lorraine's story shows that justice often begins with one person refusing to bow to humiliation. But it also teaches us that real change is not revenge. It's about transforming pain into purpose and ensuring others do not suffer the same. For older generations especially, who have witnessed years of both progress and prejudice, the lesson is clear: we carry the responsibility to speak truth, even when it is uncomfortable. And we also carry the wisdom to guide the next generation in building systems that honor dignity for all. In our daily lives, the takeaway is simple yet profound. when faced with injustice. Hold your ground with grace. Quiet courage can shake the world. Thank you so much for watching and sharing this journey with us. Your support means the world. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that inspire hope, justice, and change. Together, we can keep these voices alive.